Usually in the games you have classes like pyromancers, mages, wizard, knights, tanks or whatever. And I wanted to little bit change that up and use yokais as your class, right? You can actually make a pact with a yokai and inherit some of their abilities, just like a pact with a demon.
Yeah. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the PBBG podcast, episode 7. I'm Fuhan Pai, and I'm here with Zala. And we're here joined with Ishida from Sengoku Ykai.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for taking the time. I'm really excited to dig in a little bit what's been going on. I've been following your post on the subreddit and seen some stuff going on in Discord, too. And it seems like a lot of good things happening. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, a lot of good things, and a lot of also it was a quite crazy period. It's been only over a month, but I never expected to have so much work to do after my full-time job already. Yeah, but I guess you guys know already the pain of it.
And the joy. It's not all bad, right?
Yeah, it's also fascinating.
Yeah, definitely a lot to take on, but very rewarding. So I guess to start, for anyone who is not familiar, could you give us a brief introduction into Sengoku Ykai?
Yeah, Sengoku Ykai is, I call it like a browser, text-based browser MMORPG, but I also seen some people calling it more like a mud game, or one just more visual, because I don't really know how to categorize that game. There are quite few things that might be different. You have this real-time gameplay, turn-based gameplay, where you can actually party up with other people and do the dungeons or whatever. But there's also a lot of things that are like in the old times where you just played the text game without really having any interactions. Yeah, it's easier to try it and see. Some people like it, some people doesn't. So, but it's just like with any game.
Yeah. And we'll drop a link in the chat too for everyone who's listening. As far as Sengoku and Yōkai, those two elements, could you give a brief summary of what the Sengoku period is and the Yōkais and what that means in terms of the game setting?
Yeah, so basically Sengoku, it's the period, Sengoku historical period in Japan. This is where the feudal war was happening and a lot of movements been going on there. So it's very long. It's going for 100 years. So there is a lot of things to describe, but I just like the theme of it, of being the samurai that kind of, advance up with their melee skills, having just the typical Asian themed game that you would usually see. The most recent was like the Nyoh one, right? Where it's a similar team where you are playing as a samurai with different abilities, even some magic, and fighting against yokais or demons, right? So I took that experience, but usually in the games you have classes like pyromancers, mages, wizard, knights, tanks or whatever. And I wanted to little bit change that up and use yokais as your class, right? You can actually make a pact with a yokai and inherit some of their abilities, just like a pact with a demon.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. It sounds like a nice, like you're saying, a twist on the class system that people might be familiar with, but tied to some mythology that already does exist. It seems like a nice marriage of those two kinds of concepts.
Yeah, in the beginning, I used to just have those base classes that you are like everybody are used to, but I just want to change it a little bit because if I am already using the Sengoku team, I could actually use also a little bit of the, you could say, the fantasy side of it. So I decided to just go with the yokais instead. It was very fun. It's still very fun, like coming up with those abilities that actually matches the descriptions of the yokais, so people can also learn a little bit about them.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Do you feel like it takes you a little bit more like creative work to come up with some of that stuff? I feel like when I've thought of games that are in the typical standard, like magician, warrior, those kinds of classes, like very standard Dungeons and Dragons type stuff, it's pretty easy to come up with things because I'm so familiar with that theme. But to come up with a brand new theme, I feel like would be a lot of creative effort to come up with stuff that fits that theme. Have you found any of that kind of struggle, or do you feel like it's pretty fun to work in some fresh territory?
It was very hard. It was very hard at the beginning to have the concept of how it should actually work.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, you have the typical, like the free knight, wizard, and the priest, or healer, or whatever. And then now I have this concept of having different yokais, and but in my case, based on the history, I just wanted to somehow give them some abilities, like give them some life, so they can actually like resemble their personality, like how they are described on different pages on the historical level. It's actually, but coming up with abilities itself, it's actually very fun because you are not strict to some kind of team, right? So I can include maybe you name it, warrior abilities and magic abilities in one yokai, because perhaps they have one thing that makes them special, right? But at the same time, maybe they also have basic attack or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it also enables me to do this kind of combinations, because at the same time, this is what also makes the game fun, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can reincarnate your character and bring some of the abilities from different yokais to your next life, right? So it doesn't really matter what abilities yokai has. It doesn't have to doesn't have to be so consistent. So you can really play around with it.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about the reincarnation system. That seems like a good way to keep the experience fresh, give players some flexibility in the way they choose to explore the experience. Before we get on to other questions about the game, I was going to take a step back, and if you could maybe give us some backstory about like yourself personally, what got you into game dev, what kind of inspired you to go about this project, and just your experience in that regard.
Yeah, so personally, every day I'm just working as a front-end developer mostly, but I also have a lot to do with the backend. It's just that I just like doing the front-end stuff. So that's why I also like to keep working on design, even though I know, and you guys probably already know, that working on the design is very hard and time consuming. For some people it's just having a button there or text box there, but it really takes an effort to get it there. And a lot of thoughts. So yeah, front-ending is my part, but yeah, I've been working for already over 7 years as a front-end developer. Nice. I never was a game dev. It was just like a different fintech companies or whatever, because usually I'm not sticking to one job. It's usually a couple years and switch. Yeah, and currently, I actually, before I came up with the Sengoku Ykai, I had one game before. It was also posted on PBBG, but it was, I think, 3 years ago. And the game was up for, I don't know, I don't remember, like 5 months. It was even on the Android store. But it was like my first game, so I was trying things out, and there was a lot of issues. I had even the memory issue that I never fixed up until this day. And the game is already shut down. I still have the repository, but there was some memory issues there, and I never knew what was happening because it was just like a sandbox for me.
Yeah, it's part of the learning experience.
Yeah, and after that, I just decided to start a new game after learning all those things, because as you said, it's a very good learning experience that you usually don't ever have to, or maybe sometimes you do have a chance to touch at your daily job.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so currently I'm just working on the Sengoku Ykai. I spent, I think, around 3 years. When I look at the last commit, there was maybe one day I will post like a timeline how the design changed, and it really changed fully from something that don't even look like anything to what it's currently. But it's always I even enjoy your post under the screenshot and showcase on the PBG Discord. I very like the trans design that you are doing.
Thank you. That's a huge honor, because honestly, I think Sengoku is like one of the best designed PBBGs I've ever seen. It's gorgeous. And for anyone listening, if you're like, I don't really know about browser games, honestly, check the game out because it is stunning the way that it looks. So can you talk a little bit about your design process? You said over 3 years it kind of evolved the way that it looked and stuff. So how do you go through the design? Is it just you kind of look at it and think, oh, this could be better? Or do you blank slate, start from scratch? Or do you do a component at a time? Like, what's your philosophy? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so first of all, I always do like some research because I really like those like clean designs that are not like overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
What I always think about is that I don't like stretch. Whenever I have a game, right? Whenever you play a game, you always, at least in my case, I always like to keep it in like one screen ratio because usually you want to have it, of course, mobile friendly. But I don't like, especially when I have a huge screen, to stretch the whole thing on the whole screen, because everything you feel like you have a lot of space. You don't know what to do with that space, and things are stretched, so you have to look from left to right. And it can be hard. So first of all, I always try to stick to one size, like at least. Like in this case, you can see that everything is like in the middle, right? And I just scale it down once the screen is like much smaller. But my usual process, I'm like going through the different even websites or different games. Usually I actually take examples from mobile games. Maybe it's weird. But
no, they have some really good designs, yeah.
Oh yeah.
The mobile games that give you a really good feedback, at least the Asian one, because there's a lot of crap on the Android store. But good ones, like most of them, actually, because that's another topic. I really play the foreign mobile games that are usually never appearing on the global Android store. And by global, I mean like Europe and US.
Yeah.
And they are never translated, but they have good UIs, like like really clean, and it's just intuitive. So I just, over my, you could say, time, over my life, I just played so many of them that I already found like a lot of similarities between them and what kind of makes them better. So one of them is usually when the UI is clean. Like even, I don't know if you had a chance to play the Genshin Impact.
Oh yeah, yep.
You can see that even though there is a lot of things going on, the UI still keeps the sides clean, right? So this is just one of the examples. But yeah, when I work with the components, it's just usually starts with playing with things around. So I never doing the final version because it doesn't make sense.
Right.
I'm just doing iterations because there is always something that in the end doesn't work. So it's once I got like a couple components up, I'm going back to the person that first time. I'm trying to think as a person that first time accessing the the game, the websites, and just thinking about, okay, how would I feel when I click that? Okay, what would I expect? Maybe it will be nice if there was some kind of smooth movements here and there, or maybe there is too much information, or maybe something is too large. Those kind of details, and I like also to think about those earlier, because those design choices sometimes are hard to change in the future.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure. It's producing good results. Between your primary experience as a front-end dev and your experience with games informing your design language, I guess it seems like it's resulting in something that is clean, because it's nice when you don't have to feel like you're fighting the interface. You get to do what you want to do and think about how you're trying to play a game, instead of just trying to figure out how do you even do an action that you want to do.
Yes.
So congrats on that. That seems to be producing good results, I would say.
Yeah, it really takes an effort. I also know that you can never have a perfect design, because what's perfect design, right?
Yeah.
Some people like when there is maybe no animation. Some people like when the page is as simple as the old Reddit, right, where you just have or like the Hacker News, where you just have text and links. So I guess it's up to what's your target, right? But one thing is that, of course, that the design also brings up maybe more attention to the other people, because they see that you also maybe care about all the details, right? So
it gives a strong first impression. To Zala's point earlier, your game stands out amongst its peers because a lot of our games don't really look so great. Some of them do. It's not, we're not all bad, but it's I think there's a bar that not every game really hits in our space, and it's nice to see when that attention to detail shines through, because it just feels good. It's inviting, it's welcoming you when you see the game for the first time, that you want to it's worth your investment to try to even explore a little more just to see what it's about. So it's nice when it happens that way, because it doesn't always.
Yeah, it's also like one way to sell yourself, right? Because if you have a bad design, right? If you still can show the game like with the screenshots, which I haven't done yet, even though I've been asked to add some screenshots or videos, and there is just a lot of things to do right now.
Sure. Yeah, the list never ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, the list never ends. It always also helps to get you that player to actually try your game out. But maybe if the design is a little bit better, in the sense that as a user, I can see that you actually put more work to that than someone else, I will try it anyway, because maybe the initial impression is not as great, but maybe the game itself is much better. So
yeah. So I understand that so it was in development for about 3 years, I think is what you mentioned before. How was it that you eventually were able to determine when it's going to be released? Like what let you come to the place where you feel like it's ready? Because that's a tough thing sometimes.
Actually, I never felt like it was ready. I always felt like, okay, it's still missing that, and I kept adding those features that I thought that they are like required for me, like before I can even release the game. Probably I could reach it much earlier, right? But I think the point where I actually decided to release it was once I finished my privacy policy and the GDPR stuff, right? But in general, yeah, I think it was because one of the hardest part also when making the game is filling the game up with the content. It's actually, I had really hard time like getting myself into adding all those images, like finding those images, resize them, scale them down, also talk to my friend, which is the artist that also helped me with some of the arts that you are seeing in the game. So all those small things, I felt like they are never ending. It's always the 95% that you feel you have, but the 5%, it's just infinite, like seriously.
Yeah.
It's just kept going.
Yeah, you gotta draw a line in the sand at some point.
Yeah, even because I tried in the end. I just tried to do those small iterations where you just add one small stuff every day, because I had a lot of those small stuff. So I just decided, okay, I'll just make a huge to-do list with all those small things and do one every day. And that's what I did. Of course, some smaller things took longer than I thought, like the images. But in the end, I actually could release it. There was also adding the NPCs, actually adding the enemies, so they are more interesting than just having the basic attacks. So it wasn't only the Yōkais that have abilities, but also like making the enemies more challenging, perhaps. Interesting. So this is also requires actually a lot of thought. I had a lot of like notes written down, graphs, whatever. I don't even sometimes I don't even know how much work does it took.
Yeah, well, it seems worthwhile. I think we talked recently on one of the episodes about how that has such value to make it so that enemies don't feel generic and cookie cutter, that it adds a lot of depth. So it's good to hear that's, I mean, obviously it requires more effort and could delay something like launch, but it does seem like there's obvious value in that.
Yeah, because when I was releasing the game, I actually wanted to have like one game loop that's ready. And my game loop was having this reincarnation system on place, and like having the enemies up to 100 level. so that people, you got this kind of gear mill, like the grind mill, that's where you just grind for gears. When you reincarnate, your character also is stronger with every reincarnation, because you get additional attribute points and skill points that you can use, and skill points enables you to, because some of the yokais like actually have different requirements, and the requirements is just the skill points, so they have to learn like swimming or whatever, and you have to have those at certain levels. Just some of them have like really requires really high level, and the higher your current level is of your character, the longer you of course grind the XP. So the easier thing is just to reincarnate, and at some point you got additional skill points when you are reincarnate. So you can get it, instead of, let's say you got a yokai that requires 70 skill points, with the reincarnation you could get it down maybe to 60, right? So those kind of smaller things that even if you cannot progress, you can still do it by the reincarnation, and just having this kind of game loop where you can actually feel like you are progressing in some way. And this is the hard part that I had a lot of sleepless nights over.
Well, yeah, I can imagine it's hard to understand what feels right too when you're in the middle of it. It's hard to think from the perspective of a fresh player when you're not a fresh player. You have like your own experience and your own biases. That's, I would imagine, getting in the way of trying to balance things sometimes. Speaking of the launch, how was that? Aside from what I'm assuming would be stressful because it's a launch, but was there anything like noteworthy that came from that, or any stories about the launch that come to mind for you?
One of the things, I mean, in general, the launch was quite smooth in the sense that I haven't really had any breaking, like things that would break the game in the whole. So I haven't had to do any rollbacks or whatever. I really tried to like forge everything before I released the game. Of course, there always are some issues that I haven't thought about, some edge cases or whatever, but I'm just a human, right?
You're not a yokai?
I think the biggest issue that I had is because actually a lot of players joined in, and the servers of course slows down at some point. But it was weird because I really had the infrastructure ready for a lot of like hundreds of players, and I had no idea what actually was going on. And it appears that I just forgot to upscale my database on the Azure, like from the basic that you should only use when you have the test environment for one person to the actual production one. So whenever, it has only one concurrent save per, like connection or whatever. So it's when over 100 players been like doing the actions or whatever to the server, the database was just had really long times between each action. And it really took me a lot of time digging up what was going on, and this was the last thing that I just looked at what tier was it using, and I face palmed like really hard.
Yeah. Well, those ones are like, they're always interesting in that mistakes and oversights like that, they're very frustrating in a way because, how did I not see that? But at the same time, sometimes it's an easy fix. It's okay, well, I should have caught that, I didn't, but now I know what to do, versus like some more complicated thing that ends up become a much bigger problem to solve. So it's like it's a mixed bag, I guess.
Yeah, but I could also feel like it was annoying for people, at least for some of the players, right? Because I was really trying to find the issue, and once I thought that I had it, right, it appeared again. And then you do those small fixes. People hear that you're doing those small fixes, and they are okay. So you are just doing those small fixes instead of really testing it out and seeing if it really works. But it's like really hard to see what's the actual issue when those things happens.
Sure. Yeah. It's a complicated process.
It's crazy because like when you're developing and you're testing on your own, like the solo game devs, we just have it so rough, right? Like we have everything from trying to figure out the reincarnation system and how does it feel, and is this good? Like enough progression? Is there enough content? Do the enemies feel good? Does the UI feel good? All the way to like, does the back end work properly? Does it hook up to the database? Like how many connections are there, and diagnosing those kinds of issues. And you were saying like all the spreadsheets and charts and graphs that you've made behind the scenes too into what goes into the game, like just the variety of skill that it takes to release something like this is crazy. And then you get a launch and you have a bunch of people joining and your database isn't scaled up, and you tell that story and people are like, well, of course you should check the database. But as a developer, like you're handling so many different things. Like who would have thought of the database? Like once you find out, it's like, oh yeah, of course, that's obviously the issue. But before that, it's like, who knows what, there's so many things that go into it behind the scenes that people and players just don't ever see. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, on my day-to-day job, you just have different teams that handles different part of the bigger applications. And there are people that even though they work on the same application, or let's say, for example, backend or frontend, right? They working on some part of the infrastructure or whatever, or components or library or whatever. And you can just delegate the work to them, right? Because this is what they are doing. And now you are facing all those issues at once. You have this huge list and you don't really know where to start. Where to start. People are asking where the fix is coming or whatever. But you just have to do it one by one. And it takes really a lot of effort for a single developer. Yeah. So I really praise you guys for how long have you survived.
I mean, just like for some context, like I'm a full stack developer at my day job. And so I deal with everything from front end to back end to DevOps, database, all that stuff. And so I thought, oh, I've got a handle on this. I'll be able to do it. And I have learned so much and smashed my head into so many brick walls doing game development because it's just so different. Like even the problems that you try and solve and the way you're trying to scale and just the number of like requests you're serving, like how much database traffic is being like going back and forth and all those kinds of things. Like even from someone who claims to do that at his day job, like I still smash my head into walls all the time, not being like, I can't imagine that this would be the problem, but here we are. And this is the problem. Like,
Yeah. And on top of that, you're also managing yourself as one resource, like one person. Yeah. I feel like sometimes I could imagine, or I could feel like jealous of my own job because it's like there's a QA team and I'm the QA team and I'm also this and I'm also that. It's like, oh, I wish I had a QA team.
And then people ask, why didn't you have a video on your homepage explaining how the game is? And it's because I'm already doing 8,000 other things at the same time. I don't know how to be a video editor too.
I think that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was just saying, I think that also adds to the reward though. Is that when you take on something like this and you have to wear so many different hats, that it feels that much better when things come together and something like a smooth launch does happen. That's got to feel very encouraging, knowing that you overcame all those kinds of challenges and the stress and whatnot, and you have something to show for it that people seem to be enjoying. So that's the flip side of it, I guess.
Definitely.
Other than the database thing, are there any like crazy, weird edge case bugs that you've come across that just fun stories for the coders out there?
Any edge cases? Yeah, because there was one, because I had this kind of, the game is in real time, right? It's a turn-based real-time game. So everything happens on the server. So no actions is actually client side. So I was thinking how actually I could develop that kind of turn-based thing so that the user like have some kind of limited time between each turn, right? So let's say that there is 20 seconds as it is currently, and somehow I have to resolve the turn after those 20 seconds. So there are probably different ways of doing that. I'm not sure if mine is like a correct one, but it works. So I was thinking if I should have like a one, big instance that just resolve those different actions that maybe are in the queue every couple of seconds, or if I should just do it in batch or whatever. I just decided to use maybe it's a weird solution. I used the RabbitMQ actually to use the queue. And they have something like delayed actions. So let's say that you have action that takes 20 seconds. So I'm actually sending delayed actions to my engine server. So instead of having a loop on my engine server to check if there are any actions to be resolved, it's just the RabbitMQ just delays those, keeps those like actions and sends them when they have to be sent and ready. So that way I'm just not overloading my engine servers with all the combat resolutions at the same time.
Yeah.
But the funny thing that happened once was that there was a condition in actually the engine which I haven't thought about, and somehow it got into the infinite loop. So, so the AI was fighting with the player, but the player couldn't kill the AI, and the AI was just keep sending the actions, and the fight will actually never ended. So I had to restart the servers and apply the fix for it. But it was quite funny because the user was stuck for an hour before I actually knew about it.
Yeah, Elithor's infrastructure is the same way. So I put everything through Redis instead of RabbitMQ, but the same kind of concept, like you delay the action until it goes and actually happens. And yeah, I've had many infinite loop bugs because everything is nested logic all the way down. And if you miss a certain conditional statement or it's off by one and whatever, or it doesn't give the person their first turn because you did the math a little bit wrong. And how do you debug that? Like, how do you find that information out?
Exactly.
You know, it's just, yes, very, very complicated. Yeah.
I always like when those kinds of bugs, I don't know if this happens with you guys, but when the players observe those things or they run into them, sometimes they tell stories, like they incorporate it into the narrative of the game. That's always fun. We had an issue with Imperial Conflict where normally if you're sending soldiers to a planet, it requires an air transport type of ship. And there was a bug that happened where they were able to send troops without requiring that. So the players said, well, I guess they all have jetpacks now. So that was their interpretation of it. So I don't know if there's something like an infinite loop for a battle that never ends, if that becomes like a story within the game of the battle that never ended before the bug fix or something.
Yeah.
Never ending battle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how's the reception been? Like in terms of just the general post-launch kind of vibe from the players? Is there anything unexpected? Like are players saying anything different than you expected, or is it any good or any bad or in between?
In general, I had a positive feedback from the players, so it would also motivate me and still motivates me more to work on the game and expand on all the things, fix all that what has to be fixed. So it was quite positive, the feedback what I got from the players. But at the same time, of course, there are always things that players are not happy about or are happy about. Usually when they are happy, they are not saying anything.
Yep.
And the bad part is usually you only heard about those bad parts. So when you're saying those when you see like many of them, because people just don't give very often like positive feedback, so you only hear about the bad ones. And I was just thinking that maybe there is a lot of things wrong at some point. I just wasn't sure where were the issues, right? The example could be like the abilities of the yokais, right? It's really hard to balance them out sometimes because it's just a game, right? So you cannot like balance everything to be equal. So there is always something that will be more optimal than the other, and I'm fine with that because I just know already that it's impossible. So I just keep it that way. So people, if they want, they can play the optimal way. If not, they can just play around with whatever they do, right? But this is also something that I just had to think about through the process of the release, because before I never got any feedback and I just liked the way it worked. And once the game released and people actually complained about some of the, let's say, balance stuff or abilities, I was thinking that maybe I should really dig more into that than just adjusting some of like ability ratios or whatever just based on one comment.
Yeah, it's important to remember that I've dealt with that a lot. It took me a while to maintain the perspective that the negative feedback it is incredibly valuable, but it's also overrepresented. So there's an element there of making sure that you're not changing everything to appease what could be a vocal minority. That's tricky to do when we're in the middle of it, but it's just good to remember. At least that's something I've had to learn to not freak out when everything seems bad, because there are potentially players who are like fine the way it is and just won't say anything.
Yeah, and some people want to make your game the one that they want to play, and so maybe your vision is great and the way you designed it and balanced it is great, but they don't like that. And so in that case, it's just not the game for them, right? But some people want to try and morph it into what they want, and so they might have recommendations like, oh, you should do this or you should do that. And it's hard to kind of filter through some of that. Like maybe there's some validity to the feedback and maybe there's not. And so it's hard to, filter through all of that and figure out what to take and what to drop.
Yeah, it's a balancing act because you can't be so like sure of yourself that you're not willing to receive the feedback. So it's kind of finding that personal balance between knowing I should be open, I should listen, but I also should have a sense of vision for myself too. But it sounds like you've been working on it for a while, and even though it's only recently launched, it seems like you have a pretty good sense of like how to handle the feedback, at least in this post-launch season, I guess.
Yeah, and this is also something I'm still learning. I guess you just get wiser over time with it. Like everything takes time. So this is also, I think about this as a kind of like a part of the process.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely. Yeah, and I have a saying too. I'll joke with my players that if they're complaining about different things over time, that means I'm making progress. Because no one's ever going to say, "Oh yeah, the game is perfect. You're totally fine now." But if the things they complain about are constantly changing month over month, that's forward progress.
Yeah,
I'm laughing.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that I will have to take it as my ideology for whenever I
will
work on it.
It's a good thing to remember. I'm laughing, Zala, as you're saying that, because with Imperial Conflict, there are some things that players have been complaining about for like 5 years now. I'm like, I probably really need to get that sorted. So,
yeah,
yeah, it's good to be aware of that mindset, I guess.
Yeah.
So in terms of what's going to happen next, so you've had a successful launch, and congrats again on that. What are your longer terms now that it's actually out the door? What's your vision for what comes next for the game?
There are definitely like quite like few bigger features that are probably coming the next, I don't know, maybe next month or 2 months. One of them is what was also requested, but also something that I was actually thinking from the start. It's just that I wanted to have the game loop first, and now I am in the period where things are more stable, so I'm just doing the adjustment or fixes if there is still something that I missed. But actually I can actually focus on the new stuff, which makes me happy. It took quite a lot of effort, and this is going to be like horse breeding. It sounds funny, but I was thinking that when you are a samurai, right, you probably want to have your horse, right? And this is going to be like a really the breeding that you would see in games that are purely focusing on the breeding. So I want to include that. Besides the combat, which of course is the main part of the game, people can also have something to do in between when they play the game. So this is one of the bigger stuff. There's also going to be some world bosses. So as a player, they are gonna appear sometimes. I will still have to think of a way to actually make it so it makes sense with the game loop. But a lot of all players will be able to fight against the same world boss, and it will accumulate all the hit points that they deal to the world boss, and then rewards them with whatever rewards are gonna be after defeating maybe some rankings. I will still have to think about it, but this is also something that was like really requested by the players. So it's gonna be a thing.
That's exciting. The breeding thing in particular is very interesting, because I know that opens up a particular type of audience. I know that there are people who very much get into that type of thing just for its own sake, even if a game doesn't have combat or anything like that. So I could imagine a scenario where you could bring people in who are interested in something like horse breeding, and then that introduces them into the wider world, and now they're invested because of that hook that you got them, that they're looking for, not knowing there's going to be all these other great things that they'll discover along the way. So that's I could see the value in that. Sounds really exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine people just playing around with the breeding instead of playing the game, and that's fine. Maybe some of them probably there is gonna be some kind of genes trading or whatever, so you can breed with other players in some way. So that will be probably people that are interested in that will be able to do that.
Yeah, that's super cool. I feel like whenever game world supports players playing it for different reasons and enjoying it in different ways, that's a good thing. And that goes back to the conversation we had a couple episodes about the different player types. I feel like something like breeding to go along with combat, it will serve a wider array of tastes and have overlap between them, I'm sure. So that sounds like a potential recipe for success, I would say.
Yeah, it will still empower your character, but it's also optional, right? You can do that, but you don't have to. So
Yeah.
you can just grind gears if you don't wanna do the breeding part.
Yeah.
Do you have an end goal for the game? Like, once I get to this stage, it'll finally be done? Or do you see yourself evolving on the game indefinitely?
Currently, because the game, currently it can run indefinitely because of how the reincarnation system works. So probably I will be because I don't want to expand on more levels, right? Like 100, 110, 120, because
Right.
it's just another trade treadmill that a lot of MMOs also suffering. So I'm trying to avoid that, and instead probably there will be some side content that will be harder, but in some way will expand on your character. But yeah, currently I'm just wanna focus on expanding on the game. It's my hobby project, so it's just fun for me to do that. We'll see in probably in a year or two how my thinking changes.
Yeah, well, things always evolve.
Yeah.
So are there any specific plans you have to get the word out? I did see that you did a good job listing it on Product Hunt and IndieDB and various directories, which is, I think, great. It's awesome that you're taking the opportunity to do that. But is there anything in addition to that you would consider sometime in the next year exploring in terms of marketing?
Yeah, I'm actually planning on, because I have the mobile part always takes time. So I have to polish that also up, and probably the game will be available on Android and on the Google Play Store at some point as the progressive web app. And I'm not sure if Steam still allows to have a browser games, but if it's not the case, I'm probably gonna to have a wrapper so that you can install the game as a independent game, but running with the browser, like a Chrome engine under the hood. So yeah, I'm still thinking on expanding that so that it can reach more like a bigger audience. Of course, it's a niche, so if it finds someone that never heard about it but want to try it, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Probably if I had to rewrite the game just to have it on those platforms, I wouldn't do that because I just don't have time for that. But
yeah, it's a hard balance. Like, you want to get in front of as many eyeballs as possible, but also it's one person, right? So you can't make a custom standard iOS app that is exclusively for iOS and the iOS version and stuff. That's just not feasible. So yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place where it's trying to say, okay, how can I broaden the number of platforms that the game is on while also not stretching development resources super thin. So it's a hard balance for sure.
Yep.
I think we got about another 10 minutes here or so. This is open to Q&A from chat. If anyone here wants to throw anything at us about the game or anything else in general, this is kind of a casual freeform thing. If you guys have anything you want to know, just let us know.
Yeah. Before we get the questions, I can also say that recently, just last week, we had this big update because I had to rework the attributes, because when I was first developing the game, there have been around 10 attributes, and that was fine for me because so you could have a flexibility to put your attribute points in whatever you want. But over time, I noticed that probably it's too much, especially because the abilities scaled with the attributes. So I had to cut them down to 6 right now, which only 5 of them are used for the ability scaling. So this actually enables players to make much more fun builds that they couldn't before because it was very restrictive. And there's also a cap, the max cap on the attributes, so you cannot just put everything into one attribute and go like a pure DPS or whatever. You have to level up to increase the cap, but you can go over the cap with items and other bonuses that you are finding, right? So you can still play around with having the stats higher. So that happened. Yeah, another thing is we added the auto battle. So if you have abilities, you can pick instead of you playing the game manually, right, clicking on enemy, picking the action, you can set up some AI that will pick your auto battle abilities and choose them to fight against the enemies automatically. And we also have an offline mode, so you can actually
Nice.
start fighting, close the browser, and it will just fight the enemies as well. It uses actions, but you can get actions by playing actively. It's a drawback.
Yeah. So how AFK friendly is the game now? I know when it first launched, it was very active, and that's one of the reasons that I kind of bounced off of it. I played for quite a while because it was so visually appealing, but I like my games to be a lot more AFK friendly. So how like AFK friendly is it now? Is it just there's some things that you can AFK and still make progress, but the game is mostly active, or is it like I can play like mostly AFK now and not really have to interact with the game very much at all?
So you can play mostly like AFK now, of course.
Okay.
You have to like it's not like purely AFK that you go for 6 hours AFK mode and
Okay.
come back. It's periods, right? With VIP you can go a little bit longer, but let's say like half hour, and after the time you have to play actively to recharge the actions, right? Because all it matters is just you have to play manually to recharge the actions, and then you can go back again to the offline mode. But this enables to gives you the time where you can actually level up your gear and upgrade the gear or whatever. But the dungeons has to be like you cannot auto battle the dungeon. They have to be done like by actually you playing, right? So you have to pick the actions. You have to invite the players or play with the players and finish that. But it's pretty offline friendly right now. So.
Awesome. Sounds like some good features or changes have already come post-launch. Just in general, I'm impressed just because I feel like obviously when you do all the work to get ready to launch, you hit that point where it's like, okay, it's out the door, but you can't really take a break necessarily because it's like, okay, you have all these other things to do too, just to maintain.
Exactly.
Let alone add what I would say are pretty decent changes that are coming into the mix. So that sounds productive. So good on you for getting stuff out the door.
Yeah, I tried to get also those quality of life changes, right? Because besides having new features and whatever done right, I also tried to actually think what players want to have. Even like when you have an items, you can lock the item, you can mark an item as a favorite, or so those small things also matters for the players. Maybe not so much for me when I work on the other stuff, but they actually do.
Yeah,
and I learned it the hard way, I guess.
Yeah, it's always a balance between those quality of life features to make the existing game feel better to play, but then also giving people new stuff to play with. And you'll have vocal players on both sides saying, oh, we love the game as it currently is. It just needs to be more fluid, it needs to be easier, quality of life kind of stuff like that. But then you'll also have people who are like, I'd rather deal with the current, it's a bit of a pain, it's a bit cumbersome, but I'd rather have something new to play with. And it is a balance. Like you need to have new content for people to play with, but you also, if the game is cumbersome, then people start bouncing off and they don't want to play as much. So yeah, it's always hard balancing those two things.
Yeah. And on top of that, at least when I think about it, which of those two is worth my time? And then there's a layer on top of that of doing the work to facilitate your own development as well. So there's always all these like, where do you spend your limited time is a fun, let's say, challenge. Yeah. I think we're good to go here. Unless you had any other points you wanted to leave us with, and we'll give you a chance to plug the game too as well for the YouTube video and just anyone in chat. But is there any other stuff that you want to talk about that we didn't have a chance to hit yet?
Probably not. It's just that soon we are gonna get a new Yōkai because finally we can actually add the new content. So a new Yōkai is coming. It's gonna add 3 new abilities. It's probably gonna change gameplay a little bit. And besides that, I'm looking forward to talking to you guys again in the future. It's actually very fun listening to how are your experiences with actually the game development and the player base itself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we're a pretty small community, so being able to talk to other developers and even the players in the community and just we have a shared experience that's very rare, right? No one in my real life circle really overlaps with the PBBG community. So yeah, I love hopping on in the podcast and getting to talk to you guys and hear about, the games that are getting built in the area. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
It's a midnight here, but
ready to get some rest then? Recharge for the next thing.
Yeah, I really appreciate for having me here. So it's an honor.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining. We're happy to have you. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. Sengoku.io. And if you guys are interested in more of these, the next podcast episode will be here again at twitch.tv/FuhanPie. Zala, thanks as well for taking the time to be here. It's always
absolutely a
great time having you here. I'm going to go ahead and call it here, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
All right. See you guys.
See you guys.